Hello everyone, and thank you for being willing to learn a little bit more about learner-centered approaches, and hopefully you will find some inspiration here to try some of this in your own classroom. I'm going to start with a story to hopefully give you a little perspective on where I am coming from and why I started this project. So when I got to Finland and started getting into classrooms, on my very first visit, I was at a high school and I was meeting with a teacher. I was going to observe her class, and when I walked into the school, a little uncertain, didn't really know what I was doing, I was immediately struck by how it felt in the school. When I looked around, I saw students doing quite a few different activities. It was clearly between classes. There were students sitting on benches reading, there were students chatting, there were students on their phone, there were students at a pool table playing pool. There were students sitting on these sort of couch-like things with notebooks out in front of them, working or studying. I was immediately struck by how much it felt like a university and not like a high school. I went up into the classroom and introduced myself to the teacher, and then almost by magic, certainly there was no bell, all the students started filing into the classrooms. The hallways pretty much emptied out and class began. I realized it started at 10 o'clock, I think it was, and there was no need for there to be any sort of cue. The students just knew where they were going. So this was my first experience with a Finnish school, and it didn't end there. Once I was in the classroom, the feeling, the atmosphere was very relaxed, much less rigid than what I experience, I would say, even in my own classroom and in classrooms back at my own school. Their interactions between the teachers and students was very collegial. It wasn't sort of hierarchical where the teacher was in charge. The students seemed every bit as at home in the classroom as the teachers did. So after a few of these experiences, because this was not isolated and it was not just at the high school level, I started to see this at middle school and even primary school. Though there was obviously more structure at the lowest grades than there were at higher grades, I still felt this same environment, this same sort of relaxed environment where students were every bit as part of the school community as teachers and staff were. And so I started to get curious as to why this was the case. How is this so much different than what I've seen in any school in the US? And the things that came up to me for teachers and students was a few things. First of all, teachers 100% mentioned trust, said that we trust our students. And I was just like, what? That's crazy. The rules that they have in place all come from a place of trust versus a proactive sort of, we're going to prevent problems from occurring. They assume that the students are going to do the right thing, and they trust them. And from the students' perspectives, they feel that. They feel welcome. They feel that the school is theirs. From one of the principals that I spoke with, he had a very good quote. He said, "The school is first and foremost the students. It belongs to them. They're the reason why we're here. So why don't we create a student or learner-centered school?" Students that I interviewed felt like they had a lot of flexibility, they had a lot of choice, they had a lot of freedom. They're not worried about they don't feel as constrained, I think, or micromanaged as the students do in the US. Another teacher that I interviewed said, "We're not really that worried about what students are doing in the hallways. We trust them." And that was a middle school teacher. That I feel like is really bold to say coming from the perspective of a middle school teacher. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the tips and tricks that the teachers gave me and that I want to share with you as far as trying to create this environment in your school. Let's start with some of the benefits that I heard from Finnish teachers when I asked them about using learner-centered approaches in their classroom. First and foremost, the most common response that I got was that students are more engaged and more motivated when they're doing something that's more learner-centered. They feel like they're part of it instead of being told what to do. They have some voice and some choice in the situation. Also, learner-centered lessons tend to be more authentic and relevant to their lives, which also encourage students to be more engaged. The next thing is that students are learning more important skills like problem solving, communication, collaboration. So instead of just learning content, students learn independence, leadership, and those skills, those are something that they can hold on to for the rest of their life. Along with that, students gain self-confidence and independence when they are doing something and they are leading. They are able to see that they actually are important and have valid opinions, and this leads to more self-confidence and independence. And another one, which is kind of a byproduct, is putting more responsibility for learning on the students takes some of that off of the teachers. So when you're handing over the reins to the students, the teacher is not responsible for every step of the way. The students take on part of that responsibility. Okay? Of course, there are challenges with doing these types of approaches, as there's going to be with everything. And the number one challenge that I heard from Finnish teachers was time. And this particularly is the case when you are doing things like phenomena-based learning, when you're having multidisciplinary projects happening. It requires not only your own time, but time in the class and planning time with your colleagues. It's hard when you first start. It's hard to get out of your comfort zone. It's hard to give up that control. It can feel a bit chaotic when there's things going on around you, like everybody's doing something different, and that can be stressful for some teachers. You also need to find a way to teach both the content and the skills together. Many people think that if you do a phenomena-based learning project or project-based learning, that you're strictly doing it for the skills and that you're leaving the content aside. And if you want to teach content, you have to do it in a more traditional way. That's not true, but it does take some practice, which is where the next one comes in, and that is the need for professional development. So most teachers said that in order to really do this successfully, they need quality professional development. And then finally, assessment is different when you're doing learner-centered approaches. It's not everybody's turning in the same worksheet, and you're going to grade them the same way. So teachers need to be more flexible when it comes to assessment. So finally, some of the things that teachers here in Finland told me, if I said if you were going to talk to someone who was hesitant about doing learner-centered approaches, what would be the advice you would give them? And here were the most common things that I heard. One is to start small. There's a common misconception that you have to do all or nothing, and that's really not the case. You can start with something you're comfortable with and expand from there if you want to. Another one is you have to be willing to give up the control and be okay with that. And they all said it's okay, it works out. Scaffolding is really important. If students have not done this kind of thing before, they're not going to know how to do it. And so starting small, scaffolding, building those skills is really important. Another thing is they said to put less emphasis on grades and more on feedback. It's more about the learning process and gaining these skills and not about a specific grade. And then finally, don't try to avoid the problems. Use them as learning experience. Things do get chaotic. Things do get crazy, and that's okay. Students and teachers can learn from those situations. So I hope these tips and advice help you, inspire you to try some learner-centered approaches in your classroom. So I'd like to leave you with some pictures of students doing learner-centered activities, and some learner-centered environments within Finnish schools. I hope that this video and this course inspires you to try some learner-centered approaches in your classroom and in your school if you are so inclined. If you need more resources, there are some links within this course, and of course, I am more than happy to answer any questions or brainstorm with you if you would like, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy exploring learner-centered approaches.